My guest today is Janelle Orsi, who's the founder of the Sustainable Economies Law Center, which specializes in helping create worker cooperatives around the country. And Janelle and her work especially relevant right now when we've got a lot of baby boomers who have accumulated a lot of wealth and power in a lot of businesses and are looking for what to do with that. They can actually sell their businesses to their workers. And Janelle is an expert on how to do that. Janelle, thank you for joining me. And
My pleasure.
Tell us a little bit about worker cooperatives and what you're doing with regard to worker cooperatives.
Worker cooperatives, my favorite subject. So Sustainable Economies Law Center is my organization. We've been around for 8 years.
The Sustainable Economies Law Center. Just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure that that was out there.
It's a mouthful. So yeah, but it's out there and we have 15 staff and our scope is national, and generally what we're trying to create is economic democracy. So giving people more control over their economies, more control over where their housing comes from, where their jobs come from, and jobs is a really key one for us, and creating worker-owned cooperatives is a priority because the basic definition of a worker co-op is it's a business that's democratically owned and controlled by the workers. But over time I've realized that just changes so many things in our economy, not only for the experience of the worker, their job satisfaction, their income level, but also the flow of wealth in society is really transformed by worker cooperatives, and it flows toward the workers and toward our local communities.
Maybe if you could just help me understand the essence of the model.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the absolute essence of the model, and an example of what would that essence be.
One way I like to describe the essence is that in a conventional business, that your share of money that you put into it, like the number of shares you own, controls your share of the power, meaning the number of votes you get, and it controls your share of the profit. And so with worker cooperatives, instead of money controlling power, it's one person, one vote. So it's democratic. And the share of profits is usually distributed based on what the law says is the quantity or value of services contributed. And most worker cooperatives measure that based on the number of hours people work. Some have differential salaries and measure it based on that. But it basically means that instead of money making the decisions and money basically being the thing that attracts more wealth, it's the people who are making the decisions and getting the profits. So
now, how important is scale? The examples you've given are the Berkeley cheese board, and the other place was a bakery.
Yeah.
And then it was your organization. Does this work when you have 200, 500, 1,000, 5,000 people?
There's a few examples, and one of them I started to mention Austin, Texas. So there's a brand new worker-owned taxi cooperative. And the reason it's there, I think what catalyzed it is that Austin, the city of Austin, said that Uber and Lyft, they didn't say they couldn't be there anymore, they just put some legal requirements on them that made them leave. And so the former Uber and Lyft drivers, a lot of them ended up joining this worker-owned cab cooperative. And when I was there, I decided to take a cab and just talk to the cab driver about the business. And this person who's a member, I think they have more than 200 members. Don't quote me on that, except for I'm on video. But yeah, it's a lot of worker owners. But he knew so much about the business and the legal structure. You don't expect a cab driver to be talking to you about the legal structure of their business. So I was really impressed. They are really engaged. And another big one that has about 2,000 worker owners is in New York City, and it's a home care provider cooperative. So independent home care professionals who normally work in isolation have come together as a cooperative, and are basically, they own the company that's helping to schedule their hours and provide benefits and other services to them.
So the company that's, just to take that big one in New York, the company that's scheduling their services and deciding on their hours really is a service, provides a service to them, to these workers.
Yeah.
So it's as if they own this kind of service hub that's at the center.
Yeah.
And that sounds like a good model for worker cooperatives, because you have a lot of contract workers these days who are on their own, and maybe they want to get together and own sort of the service hub that is telling them what, kind of giving them indications what to do.
Yeah.
But then the question arises, I suppose, if it's not going to be hierarchical, if the number of votes you get depends on on what you're bringing to the business, or what you are, the hours you're putting in, or some other metric? Does education count? I mean, let's be, I really want this to be as practical as possible, but let's say I went to the trouble of getting a college education, and I have, not to be hierarchical about it, but I have a little bit more skill than somebody who did not graduate from high school. Let's say we want to get together with a bunch of other people in a cooperative, but I feel like, I put in so much time and effort and money to get my education, and I do feel like I have sort of managerial expertise.
Yeah.
Does that mean that I have to forget all that? Or can we have a cooperative in which I get extra points for all of the additional training and investment I put in?
You could. And you know who would decide it is just your coworkers. And so in our organization, what happens is about half of us are lawyers and half are not. And of course, the lawyers end up holding a lot of the more responsibility around doing the actual legal work. And basically the work that people do is not limited based on their skill and their credentials. There's no fixed hierarchies, but there are kind of natural divisions of labor that form. And then to the extent that the workers feel like they want to reward somebody or compensate them for the extra education they got or extra skills that they bring, then that's their choice. So
well, just bear with me, because I'm fascinated by this model, and we've been talking about worker ownership and worker control forever, and you're saying that it is happening, and you and your organization are facilitating it. You're a lawyer, and you're bringing some legal expertise to help workers presumably do this around the country. And then the question, I suppose, is if the workers decide on sort of how much power everybody's going to have and how much benefits people are going to have, how do you recruit people initially to come together? That is, if you and I are part of the same cooperative and we need that person in terms of their expertise, what do? We have a meeting with that person, we say, we want you to join us, and we negotiate.
Just how do you decide who to hire and how much to pay them and that
all of those normal
things.
Really,
just much like a normal business would. But I honestly think as the awareness of worker cooperatives grow, a lot of people realize that that's the way in which they want to work. They just realize they'll have so much more control over their day-to-day work and over their career trajectory, the conditions of their workplace. And that just feels so much better. There's so many people who are unhappy in their jobs, and then they can picture being in a cooperative where they're working together with people as peers. And we've attracted a lot of people to our organization who left higher paying jobs to come work with us because they knew that they would be happier working in a more democratic environment.
So that happiness that comes from working in a more democratic environment, that's not dependent on being in Berkeley or being on the West Coast or being, that happens sociologically even in the reddest of red states.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And so is this a movement? Would you describe this as a movement?
I would say we're going to make it a movement, and that's, when I became a lawyer 10 years ago and set up a law practice in Berkeley to serve worker co-ops, there weren't many worker cooperatives at the time. 10 years later, there still aren't many, but there is a degree to which worker cooperatives are just in the air. You hear people talk about them. I would say maybe there's about twice as many as there were, there were about 40 10 years ago. Maybe there's closer to 80 in the Bay Area now. And that includes some that are just still getting up and running, but it's just getting a lot of attention. And now we have the city of Oakland and the city of Berkeley. Both the city councils have adopted resolutions to support worker cooperatives and to begin pouring more resources toward them and toward helping convert existing businesses to cooperatives, helping to provide incentives for contracting and procurement. So there's a lot of little pieces coming together that I think will help to push this maybe to a tipping point where it will feel a lot like a movement.
So let's say I'm a CEO of a medium-sized or small business, and I come to you and I say, Janelle, you're a lawyer and you're doing all this cooperative work. I would like to turn my business into a cooperative.
Yeah.
What do I do?
So I would say form a committee of workers who are interested in doing this, because you definitely need the worker buy-in, literally and figuratively, and have a lot of training about what cooperatives are, how governance can work, and of course there are many ways that governance can work in a cooperative, and come to a price that's based on what do you want to sell your business for and what can the workers afford. It doesn't have to be what the market determines your business is worth.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Let me make sure I understand that, because we just went over a very important point. So I came to you, I'm CEO, and you're saying that I've got to, basically part of this is selling what is now my business to my workers. All right.
Yeah.
And they have to, we've got to come to a price. Sure.
Yeah. And there's a growing number of financial institutions that are helping to finance this too. There's a national organization called the Working World that's helping finance worker buyouts of their own companies. So, there's a lot of paper trails involved, but I think honestly it's the training and of the workers that's the most important piece, because it's transitioning the power into their hands, and there's so many ways in which that power can be managed, and a lot of possibility.
Well, let me go to the public policy side of this, because you said a moment ago that you have cities, city councils who are giving some seed money to get these things going. What kind of seed money, and how does that seed money work? And if I want to, either I'm a CEO, I want to sell my business to my workers, or I'm a bunch of workers and I want to create a cooperative, why do I need seed money?
So, all businesses generally need seed money, and I think what's hard for worker cooperatives is their unconventional structure. It makes them look foreign to banks, so it's harder for them to get conventional capital, and venture capitalists don't want to invest in them because it's not an opportunity to earn a 10 times return. So you need to tap other sources of capital, and the city of Newark, New Jersey, I think, has a program now where they're going around to find sort of medium-sized businesses where the owners are nearing retirement age, and then help finance the sale of that business to the workers. And New York City has dedicated maybe $1.5 or $2 million to worker co-op development. And I think overall worker cooperatives have a lot going against them in the sense that people don't understand what they are. Workers need more training. There's just different infrastructural needs and different legal needs, and so I think pouring resources into worker cooperatives to basically level the playing field for them is at the very least essential.
What about employee stock option plans? Now, they've been around for a very long time.
They have,
and they are incentives in terms of tax breaks if you form an employee stock option plan. How does that relate to worker cooperative?
So they're different in that they're not necessarily democratic. Your share of ownership, determines your share of power, more or less. It's a little different how the governance works, but it also determines what you get when you leave, and what share of profits you get. So the main flaw with ESOPs is that, well, for example, there's New Belgium Brewing Company. It's a very large beer company with about 500 worker owners, and they're structured that way, but it's in the interest of the company to sell to a larger company like Anheuser-Busch or one of those, because the workers right now would get a huge payout. And so it's designed to benefit those workers right now, but it's not designed to create long-term good jobs in those communities of Asheville or in Colorado. And so they're really designed to kind of get swallowed back up into the conventional business structures in the long term. Whereas worker cooperatives are generally structured to either avoid being purchased, or if they are purchased, the proceeds get distributed to both past and present workers, and so there's less of a financial incentive to sell out.
Is this, do you envision this, and maybe it already is becoming, a kind of new form of American capitalism? I mean, is this, put on your prophetic hat, is this where we are inevitably going?
I think so. And another way that I know this is we have a walk-in legal advice clinic in Oakland and Berkeley, and we've served 800 clients, and they're mostly coming in now with cooperative on their minds. And it's not just worker co-ops, it's housing co-ops, because people want to have a form of control over local real estate and their own housing, and it's energy co-ops because they want to own the sources of their own energy. And so it keeps coming back to these democratic ownership structures. So.
And one, I mean, I have so many questions, and we don't have an enormous amount of time, but we have a democratic ownership structure. Let's say this is successful. We've put together something, a worker cooperative, but these workers over here want to go in this direction. They really want to, you know, the whole business to do something different. These workers over here want to do this. We can't reach agreement, and they want to break off and do their own thing.
Yeah.
Is it going to be hard to do that?
I don't think so. I feel like I've seen this happen. I can't think of a specific example, but again, it's up to the workers deciding that it's in their best interest to do it that way. So yeah.
So a true workplace democracy, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And the real value added here, presumably, is that, as you said, workers are more satisfied.
Yeah. I think that's a real value add. It's also just how wealth is flowing in society when wealth has already become so concentrated in the hands of few. I feel like that's leading us toward disaster, and worker cooperatives turn that around and put the sort of flow of wealth back toward communities and workers. And there's a lot of core value elements to worker co-ops, but as a worker, I have to say I'm just much happier working in a cooperative environment.
Do you consider yourself a professional?
I don't know what that means, but probably. I am a lawyer, so that sounds fairly professional.
And how do you, as a lawyer, prevent others who are maybe not as educated from being intimidated by your lawyerly professional skills?
Well, that's a really interesting question, but cartooning helps, and I do feel
You're
like
a cartoonist.
I am a cartoonist.
I
needed to work that into the conversation.
Fellow cartoonist.
Yeah, well, I will say lawyers as a profession have really elevated themselves into a tower that's so separate from society, and they've made their services so expensive. And one of the goals of our organization is to just bring lawyers back down to earth, make their services affordable and accessible to low and middle income communities. And a lot of that has to do with just changing the actual way we work. The legal documents we create are different. They're much easier to understand. We've created cartoon bylaws for worker co-ops because we feel like every worker needs to understand how this business works. And so we're just trying to dismantle all of the sort of cultural and practical aspects of the profession that have separated us from day-to-day life.
So you're democratizing expertise and sort of knowledge in some way as well.
Yeah, basically that's it. Giving people access to the law, because the law is our agreement as a society about what we want to do together. We should have access to that.
Well, I love the ideas. I love your idealism.
Thank you.
And let's hope you continue to be successful.
I will. So thank you.
Thank you, Janelle.
Thank you.